Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Tatapi kirtayam yanga. Yet tatapi kirtayam yanga. Yatamati yatashrutam. Yatamati yatashrutam. Kirting haresvam satkartung. Kirtim haresvam satkartung. Giram anya bidhasatim. Giram anya pasatitim. Tata, therefore, api, although it is so, kirtayami, I do describe, anga, O Vidura, yatha, as much as, mati, intelligence, yatha, as much as, shrutam, heard, kirtim, glories, hare, of the Lord, svam, own, satkartum, just purify, giram, speeches, anyabhidha, otherwise, asatim, unchaste. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. In spite of my inability, whatever I have been able to hear from the spiritual master and whatever I could assimilate, I am now describing in glorification of the Lord by pure speech, for otherwise my power of speaking would remain unchaste. Please repeat, in spite of my inability, whatever I have been able to hear from the spiritual master, and whatever I could assimilate, I am now describing in glorification of the Lord by pure speech, for otherwise my power of speaking would remain unchaste. Purport. The purification of the conditioned soul necessitates purification of his consciousness. By the presence of consciousness, the presence of the transcendental soul is verified, and as soon as consciousness leaves the body, the material body is not active. Consciousness is perceived, therefore, by activities. The theory put forward by empiric philosophers that consciousness can remain in an inactive state is the proof of their poor fund of knowledge. One should not become unchaste by stopping the activities of pure consciousness. If the activities of pure consciousness are stopped, certainly the conscious living force will be otherwise engaged, because unless engaged, the consciousness has no standing. Consciousness cannot be silent even for a moment. When the body does not act, the consciousness acts in the form of dreams. Unconsciousness is artificial. By induced extraneous help, it remains for a limited period, but when the intoxication of the drug is finished, or when one is awake, the consciousness again acts earnestly. Maitreya's statement is that in order to avoid unchaste conscious activities, he was trying to describe the unlimited glories of the Lord, although he did not have the ability to describe them perfectly. This glorification of the Lord is not a product of research, but the result of hearing submissively from the authority of the spiritual master. It is also not possible to repeat all that one has heard from the spiritual master, but one can narrate as far as possible by one's honest endeavour. It does not matter whether the Lord's glories are fully explained or not. One must attempt to engage one's bodily, mental, and verbal activities in the transcendental glorification of the Lord. Otherwise, such activities will remain unchaste and impure. The existence of the conditioned soul can be purified only by the method of engaging mind and speech in the service of the Lord. The Tridandi Sannyasi of the Vaishnava school accepts 3 rods, representing the vow to engage in the service of the Lord with body, mind, and speech, whereas the Ekadandi Sannyasi takes the vow to become one with the Supreme. Since the Lord is the Absolute, there is no distinction between him and his glories. The glories of the Lord, as chanted by the Vaishnava Sannyasi, are as substantial as the Lord himself. And thus, while glorifying the Lord, the devotee becomes one with him in transcendental interest, although he remains eternally a transcendental servitor. This simultaneously one and different position of the devotee makes him eternally purified, and thus his life becomes a complete success. So Maitreya here is speaking humbly to Vidura, and he's saying, despite his inability, due to not being able to assimilate everything from the spiritual master, he's trying to describe it by pure speech. Otherwise, that speech that is not describing the Lord is described as unchaste. And Srila Prabhupada also reiterates 3 times in the purport about the unchastity of not using speech or activities in the service of the Lord. So he talks a lot about that, and he talks about consciousness in this purport. So he explains that consciousness can be proved by the presence of is proof. The transcendental soul is proof of consciousness. So that within a body, there's consciousness, like from tip to toe, there's consciousness. And if you prick somebody with a pin, they'll feel it. But if you prick a rock or a piece of wood, they're not going to feel it. They have no consciousness. So consciousness, of course, we have gradations of consciousness. In the human being, the consciousness is very high. And then in the animals, it's a little lower. And then we have insects, fish, plants, etc. So they have consciousness. They respond to various stimuli. But that consciousness is in a lesser state. So Prabhupada talks about this chastity of speech, but actually it's not just speech that we have to use chastely, in other words, for the soul, on the soul level, but all our activities as devotees are practiced on the level of the soul, so that we're using our body in the service of the Lord, we're using our mind in the service of the Lord, and of course here's speech. So I just wanted to read a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote in 1968 about this. And he says, yes, it is your good fortune that you can serve Krishna in so many ways. To work, to write, to speak, to paint, to build. All of these talents must be employed in Krishna's service. That will make you perfect. We are so fortunate to be in this human form of life and to have the opportunity and the capacity to serve Krishna. And as there is very little time, we must do as much each day as we possibly can to serve Krishna and to become always engaged in thoughts and activities of Krishna. Maya may try to pull us from Krishna's service and try to engage us in her service, but we must simply persevere and try to do as much as possible for Krishna each day, and gradually it will be easier and easier to keep engaged in Krishna consciousness activities. And pray to Krishna to please keep us always engaged in the service of his lotus feet. Krishna is very kind and he is never ungrateful, and he will give you more and more opportunity to serve him. That is his mercy. So that's a very nice letter where Prabhupada's saying all our activities, all our talents, whatever we can do, we do them for Krishna, and that's to our eternal benefit. So we know whatever talent we have, it's coming from Krishna. Krishna has 100% of all wonderful transcendental qualities, and we are given little drops. So whatever we can use for Krishna, that is for our eternal benefit. So we can use what we've been given in the material body to eat, sleep, mate, defend, and just have a so-called enjoyable life. But unfortunately, the soul then is neglected. The soul which is sitting within and waiting always to be woken up, that consciousness that wants to be in the Lord's service, simply because that's our eternal situation, to be engaged in the Lord's service. So in that way, if you use this body to perform these activities, you're actually frittering away your greatest fortune. And that is the opportunity to engage our consciousness in the Lord's service. So Maitreya is very humble. Of course, we know he's a glorious, pure devotee. But here he's saying, that he's saying that in spite of my inability, whatever I've been able to hear, whatever I could assimilate. Now we know that Maitreya Rishi is, of course, able to assimilate anything that's coming from his exalted spiritual master, because, his heart is pure. But still, he's giving this humble statement that, in spite of my inability, I'm trying to speak about Krishna. So this humility is such a gem, it's such a jewel, and it's not always easy. But it kind of has to be the thread that runs through our life. It has to be there in our chanting, as Lord Chaitanya tells us. We have to be humble. And it has to be there in our speech. It has to be there in our activities. So it's actually it's one of the important qualities of a devotee, and, perhaps one of the most important qualities, to have that humility and to always feel oneself meek and humble before the spiritual master and before the Lord. So when you think about it, we're very, very, very tiny. You think about the spiritual world, it's full of perfected living entities eternally serving Krishna in great bliss. And then we think about all the various planets of the demigods, all the different types of living entities there are that are in the elevated status and are following the Vedas and worshipping Krishna. And then here we have, in Kali Yuga, with the higher planetary systems, they don't experience this Kali Yuga, but here we are on this planet, stuck in Kali Yuga, and we've, taken birth with deficient qualities, because, that's what happens in Kali Yuga. So we're not sort of meant to be endowed with wonderful qualities in Kali Yuga, because it's the wrong time to have taken birth then. We would have taken birth in the earlier Satya Yuga, etc., and perfected our lives. But here we are, we've blown it, and we're here. So it sort of behooves us to have that feeling of humility in our everything we do. So we're hearing from the saintly guru, and here Maitreya is saying whatever I could assimilate, which kind of implies that there are things he couldn't assimilate, and we can't believe that that's the case. But for us, we can see, we can't assimilate so much of what Srila Prabhupada is giving us, what the acharyas are giving us. But nevertheless, we try to repeat that and give to others. And the whole miracle of ISKCON is that in those early days, when we absolutely knew nothing, and pretty much we had so few realizations about spiritual life at all, but how is it that in that state, that neophyte state, the movement spread all over the world? So the way it spread is because the devotees were very much trained that whatever's been told by the spiritual master, we repeat that word for word. And Srila Prabhupada used that example of the mango from the top of a tree. It's very soft. How you can't throw it down, it'll smash. It has to be passed from hand to hand to hand down the tree, and it gets to the bottom. It's in perfect, juicy, undamaged state. So that's the same with the words from the acharyas. We pass them down as they are given to us. So in those early days, I'm sure most of us hadn't assimilated much of what we were repeating, but we really repeated it with full understanding that this is because it's come from a pure devotee, because it's come from the acharyas. This is the truth, whether we've realized it or not, but we passed it on. So in that way, it was such a miracle that it just went everywhere, you know. Srila Prabhupada couldn't be everywhere, but the devotees, by their, very sincere repeating of what Srila Prabhupada had said, then other people were sort of infected with that and took it up. So we may not have assimilated everything, but by repeating it and by continuing on with our service as Srila Prabhupada has given us, then that the content and the meaning of what we're repeating and saying to others and reading, etc., becomes more clear as the days and weeks and years and decades go on. So, if we do repeat, then the Guru becomes happy and Krishna becomes happy. So that's a pretty good formula, that the Guru becomes happy and Krishna becomes happy by us repeating. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we have text, chapter 18, text 68 and 69. So for one who explains the supreme secret to the devotees, devotional service is guaranteed, and he will come back to me. And at the end of the purport on that verse, Srila Prabhupada says, anyone who tries sincerely to present Bhagavad Gita as it is will advance in devotional activities and reach the pure devotional state of life. As a result of such pure devotion, he is sure to go back home, back to Godhead. So there we have his assurance. And then, of course, the next verse is also important. There is no servant in the world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. So it's so pleasing to Krishna when we repeat his glories and talk about him. He becomes pleased, the Guru becomes pleased, he becomes pleased, and we become pleased. Our heart becomes happy because we're talking about Krishna. We also become pleased. So it's what we call a win-win situation. So we might say that we're not qualified to speak on what we've heard. We can't pass it on because we're not qualified. But however, we have in the 7th canto the example of little Sri Prahlad. So when Lord Nrsingadev appeared and ripped apart Hiranyakashipu, then he was like the fury remained that this demon had insulted his beautiful, pure devotee. He was very angry. So various people stepped forward, or not people, exalted souls stepped forward to try to glorify him. Amongst them were Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Indra, the Rishis, the Pitris, the Siddhas, the Vidyadharas, the Nagas, the Manus, the Prajapatis, the Gandharvas, the Charanas, the Yakshas, the associates of Vishnu within Vaikuntha. They also stepped forward and tried to pray to him. But he was still furious. So when Lord Brahma said, you go, Lakshmi said, I'm not going in front of him. And then Lord Brahma said, you should go. So little Prahlad paid his obeisances, that tiny figure in front of a huge Lord Nrsingadev. And that melted Lord Nrsingadev's heart so much that he became ecstatic. It's described that Lord Nrsimhadev became ecstatic just to see that tiny Sri Prahlad offering obeisances. So and Lord Nrsimhadev then put his divine hand, on the head of Sri Prahlad. So when Sri Prahlad stood in front of the Lord and began to pray to him, there's the purport there's a class where Srila Prabhupada is talking about this. And he says, well, Sri Prahlad, he's just a 5-year-old boy, did not have the language to glorify in a beautiful way the Lord. He used his simple language, but that language was so pleasing to the Lord. And Srila Prabhupada says in that class, you don't have to worry that you're not a great scholar. But Krishna, he says, is after your heart. And because Sri Prahlad was offering in such a beautiful, loving, heartfelt manner, then Lord Nrsimhadev was totally, gave himself to Prahlad. And then he offered him any benediction, etc. So it's an amazing thing that someone who's, a 5-year-old can capture the Lord's heart like that. But when you understand this point that the Lord is looking at the heart and not your intelligence and your abilities and all or whatever else, the Lord is simply looking at the heart. So we don't have to worry about material qualifications when we're going before the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada very much recommended, he very much wanted that the devotees preach, tell others about Krishna, because that's the way that the movement spreads, and that's also the way things become solidified in our hearts when we're talking with others. Or we can form together and discuss, have a class, a little gathering when we talk about scripture, read from the various books and talk about the scriptures. All these things are very affirming to the heart, and they help us, and they help, that way we help each other. And that's the instruction in the Nectar of Instruction, that we exchange between each other. We talk about Krishna, we hear others talking about their realizations, and it's a very kind of wonderful exchange. And that has to, of course, we have to have heard first from the sadhu, and then we share, and then that sharing has meaning. So if we are very conscious, then we try to make exchanges with other devotees, or with a person that you're talking to about Krishna, someone else, meaningful. So that's that chastity of speech. We can use our speech to blah, blah, blah about this, that, and the other. But that's described here, that's not the chastity of speech. Chastity of speech is to speak so that the other person will be elevated. They will gain something. So to do that requires thought. When we're speaking with devotees, we need to be thoughtful about what we're saying and what we're hoping that person can gain. So, in other words, it's not a thoughtless process when we're talking with each other. And things should be meaningful. And that way, everything is going upwards rather than swirling around or going down. So Prabhupada says, hearing must be from a sadhu. This is a lecture from Srimad Bhagavatam in Los Angeles, 1972. Hearing must be from a sadhu, from a devotee, from the lips of a devotee. Just like Shukadev Goswami was speaking to Maharaj Pariksit. So, or even if you hear yourself, you read books, you will save your life. If you simply read Krishna book, this was in 72, this is all we had. We didn't have lots of Bhagavatams, we just had a few. We had Krishna book, we had Bhagavad Gita, and we had teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and I think we had Nectar of Devotion in it. Yeah. So he says, if you simply read Krishna book or Bhagavad Gita, teachings of Lord Chaitanya, then you know. He says, as long as you are reading, the sun is unable to take your life. It is not possible for the sun to take your life. So we could think, well, how does the sun not take our life? You know, we're all getting older and the sun is rising and setting and we're losing days. But actually, every human, not every animal, in that case it's automatic, but every human is creating their next body. So we are creating our next body. We're creating our next body by our thoughts, our desires. It's desire that, takes us, from one body to the next, by our activities, by our speech, etc. So, if we are mindful, then, and we are taking our shelter of the scriptures and reading the scriptures, then we are creating that next life as a devotee, and hopefully as a, in the upper realms of devotional association. We're by ourselves trying to be good association and praying for good association, then we'll be placed in a situation where we have good association. Or we may get lucky and be actually go back where everybody's completely eternally immersed in Krishna. So, in Srila Prabhupada's, in the purport here, Srila Prabhupada is talking about using mind and body and words, and that sannyasi danda is for mind, body and words, whereas he's saying the ekadandi of the Mayavadis, this is because they want to become one with the Lord, so they got this one danda. But the devotees' tridandi one is mind, body and words. But that's for everybody to use mind, body and words in the Lord's service. It's not like just the sannyasis and the rest of us can just do what we want. So there's a very nice song by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur where he talks about using everything for Krishna. Manasa deha geha yo kichumor arpilon tuapada nandikishore. So in that verse, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, whatever I have, my mind, my body, my home, everything is yours. That's his understanding, his realizing they're all for the lotus feet of you, my dear Nanda Kishore. And Prabhupada actually mentions that song in a class in Montreal. This is my house, this is my wife, these are my children. And then he says, nobody is yours. You have come according to your karma, and they have come according to their karma. And it is a play only that one is father, one is mother, one is son. It is by the arrangement of material nature. And then he says, everything will be finished within the twinkling of an eye. So actually, it is not fact. We should not think that it is our possession. Therefore, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, my possession says, and he's referring to this song, and he says, my possession means that some mental concoction, this lump of body. So therefore, whatever possession I have got, I surrender unto you. Manasa deha geha yokichumor. This is surrender. Apilan tuapade nanda kishore. So the real process is to surrender to Krishna. Then Krishna will give you all intelligence. So we have such an opportunity in this body and in this situation that Krishna has kindly placed us in to practice, use our speech to glorify the Lord and practice these very kind of important, pertinent instructions from Srila Prabhupada. And when we do glorify the Lord, we actually find that we feel very joyful. That's the wonderful thing about when we're doing something like fully for Krishna. The fact is that everything about that activity is glorified and wonderful and has good result. So, Matjita, Madgita Prana, Bhurayanta Paraspram, Katayantas Chamangnicham, Tushyanti Cha Rumanti Cha. Though this is verse 9 from chapter 10 of Bhagavad Gita, the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me, their lives are surrendered to me, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss, enlightening one another and conversing about me. So there we go. They derive great satisfaction and bliss. And there's also a quote from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is very similar. 3:25. In the association of pure devotees, discussion of the potent pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and heart. By cultivating such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of liberation. Therefore, one is freed and one's attraction becomes fixed. Then real devotion and devotional service begin. So there's so much encouragement for us to practice this art of hearing about Krishna and speaking about Krishna to whomever we can. And our consciousness becomes purified, Cheto Darpana becomes purified, heart becomes happy. We become happy when we do that. This whole process is a win-win situation by the great grace of the Lord. So there was one other quote I wanted to say. And that is, this is 11.3.22. Prabhupada, this is, from Srimad Bhagavatam. Accepting the bona fide spiritual master as one's life and soul and worshipful deity, the disciple should learn from him, the process of pure devotional service. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the soul of all souls, is inclined to give himself to his devotees. Therefore, the disciple should learn from the spiritual master to serve the Lord without duplicity and in such a faithful and favorable way that the Supreme Lord, being satisfied, will offer himself to the faithful disciple. So just imagine, Krishna is so kind. If we can just practice and make the most sincere attempt possible to perform our service with faith in the Guru, then he becomes purchased. It's just the most amazing phenomena about our Krishna, that he becomes, he gives himself to the devotee who behaves in this way. So, of course, it has to be that everything has to be given by Krishna, because we can't sort of claw our way by our activities. We're performing these activities with the prayer that Krishna will be pleased, and because it's a descending process, he becomes pleased, and then we are able to become elevated. So I just wanted to finish off with such a nice quote. I've been reading, of course, for me it was very dear because I was there for 3.5 years, and from 74 January on in Bombay, and we saw so much of Srila Prabhupada there. And just reading it, it's just so lovely that it all becomes to life again, and you remember so many beautiful things. So there was a builder. His name was Mr. Shetty. He was a very nice gentleman, and Mrs. Shetty also a beautiful lady. And they had so much to do with the whole gaining of the temple. Even when they first got the signature from Mrs. Nair, who owned the land, Mrs. Shetty immediately took off her gold bangles and gave them as the first donation. They were in Hyderabad at the time. So Mr. Shetty was building, there were buildings all around Hare Krishna land in which there were tenants, but there were flat roofs. So the devotees were living in not nice circumstances. So Srila Prabhupada asked Mr. Shetty to build, he was an engineer, to build a top floor on all the apartment buildings. I think there were 6, 7. And so he did that. He was building that despite so many difficulties. You know, he had to get permission and etc. from the council. They were still stalling on the temple, but Mr. Shetty was building these places for the devotees to live in. And Srila Prabhupada was so pleased with him. And he said to Mr. Shetty, and just as you are building these rooms for my disciples here at Hare Krishna land, he said, Lord Krishna is making your rooms ready in Krishna Loka. And Mr. Shetty replied, I am a sinful man. How can I go to Krishna Loka? And Prabhupada said, that I will see to. Prabhupada assured him, this is not your duty. I will see that you go to Krishna Loka. So that's the power of, Srila Prabhupada. So if he sees that we're studying his books and we're repeating and trying, then he can work miracles. So we always have to pray that Srila Prabhupada can be pleased with us, and then disciple, grand disciple, it doesn't matter if we're taking shelter, then he'll be there for us. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or comments or refutations? Or
You mentioned something about Kali Yuga, it's a bad time to take birth. That I've heard in classes that this particular Yuga, Kali Yuga, was very special. Have you heard this before?
Yes, there's 4 colours of incarnation. So the yellow colour is Lord Chaitanya, but we say he's Lord Chaitanya, but actually in other yugas he's just a Shaktavish avatar. Lord Chaitanya himself doesn't come, but in this yuga Lord Chaitanya himself came. So when he comes, he, as a Shaktavish avatar, he gives the Mahamantra. But Lord Chaitanya came, when he came, of course he's Radha and Krishna combined, and he's like, a form of ecstatic, he's in ecstasy always. So he was freely giving out love of God. And in fact, it's described that when he would, when he was traveling to South India or wherever he was going, if someone would just see that ecstatic form of Lord Chaitanya, they would gain love of God in their heart. So that's not the case normally with the Shaktavish avatar that comes. But Lord Chaitanya is very special. But you see, so many people haven't heard about that. So, it was the glory of the Acharyas that they kept that alive, and that Srila Prabhupada brought it to the West. So now, so many more people are becoming fortunate and getting...
Taking birth in this Kali Yuga
is the best Kali Yuga to take birth in. Yeah, for sure. We're very fortunate. We don't even know the potency of the Mahamantra. I mean, just yesterday I was reading in the Srimad Bhagavatam how all the Vedic mantras, this was for previous yagyas that were happening, and it's described then, Prabhupada says in the purport, but none of that is necessary. All those Vedic yagyas are contained in the Mahamantra. Just like in Krishna himself, within Krishna, all the different incarnations, Lord Vishnu's there, Lord Nrsingadev's there, Lord Varaha, they're all within Krishna. So Prabhupada was explaining that in the Mahamantra, all those Vedic mantras are contained. So we're just exceptionally fortunate, but we just because of our, false ego and the modes, the strengths of the modes, etc., we get covered, but actually we're super fortunate.
I was just reflecting on, you were talking about being chaste in our words and activities. And I was just thinking that can be unpacked a lot, much deeper with the guidance of devotees, because sometimes being chaste also requires sensitivity For someone may speak chastely, speak the scripture, but they're hammering it down to someone who's not really ready. So I was just thinking about Sanatana Goswami. He would go to the villages and ask them even, how are you? Have you got your children married and things like that? So being chaste also requires sensitivity because they do make connection with Krishna. It's not just on the surface. Everything, there's a deeper meaning to it.
Yeah.
Because I experienced that someone said something, and it was very hurtful. I guess I'll give the example, like they said, oh, you just want to serve the deities, but you're not really for the devotees, So it requires sensitivity because that person doesn't associate with that person, doesn't mean they're not opening up with other devotees. So chastity requires sensitivity as well.
Yes, it requires thoughtfulness. I was trying to get across, probably didn't, but I was trying to get across that when we have an exchange with someone, it should be the person who's receiving that exchange is going to get something that will elevate them. Yeah. So, but that requires thought. That's not going to happen if you're not careful when you're speaking to that person, how you speak to them. So it's so easy to sort of, get those gums going. But it's much more difficult to think about what we're hoping to gain with the connection to another person. Yeah, so it does require thoughtfulness and,
Hare Krishna. I think we could have a whole seminar on this class. There's so much in it, and I didn't assimilate it. I could just listen to the class again. So and the point that Vaishnava is making too is that, and you made the point that when we speak to someone, we should speak in an to uplift them. I think the words you said, and it's. But at the same time we have to take time to say something, and sometimes we blow it and, we just say things and then we have to think about it. But at the end of the day, I think I want to say is that also the truth has to be taken and people have to work on themselves, and sometimes there's got to be some sort of balance. They've got to hear the truth, even if it isn't uplifting. I think you know what I'm talking about.
So there's a sandwich.
Yes.
So if you have to say something to someone, but there's ways to say things. If you say something to a devotee that needs to be said, it may not be something they will like to hear. But if you approach that devotee with affection and respect, and then, the sandwich thing is a method that people use, that you say something nice, then you suggest some change, and then you finish with something nice. So that's a nice way to do it, that's a diplomatic way to do it. It's to do with the approach and the concept, the loving concept, that here's Krishna's beloved part and parcel. Krishna loves this devotee. I need to say this. How can I say this so that, it won't cause offense? And in that way, you'd be surprised how much you can get away with saying, if you've said it in a very careful way.
Attitude.
Yeah, it's a loving attitude. You have to approach someone with love so that they don't feel like you're there to tear them down. That's can be very crushing. But, it's anyway, yeah, it's a bit of an art. Yeah.
We still got time? Any more questions? I have another question here. It always been the conversation around Krishna, and I was thinking, where's the boundary on that? Because sometimes you're exchanging with people and it's just being polite to them because they're not on the level of Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
So is that still Krishna conscious?
Well, you approach people differently, like, of course, you approach someone on the street and you just might say hi, they may not be ready to even hear Hare Krishna, but you always have to judge how to, what you can give to someone. Sometimes I just walk through town and I just think, well, I can't give anything, but I can give this person a smile. And it's so surprising, people will just smile back, And, so it has to be something that they can accept. Mainly I was talking about elevating a devotee or someone that you're talking to about Krishna, you can slip things in and, try to, give them some Krishna consciousness.
Thank you.
Okay, Hare Krishna, thank you so much. Hare Krishna.